Eat what is good. Eat of my goodness, of the glory. Eat all the goodness. Without money, no price. But the thing is, and I didn't hear it in your translation, so that your soul is satisfied. That is the impact of the verses. So go ahead and circle that, Russ, and write it to the side. What moron said to take the word soul out of here? Because see, stop and think about it a little bit. It may change your approach to moaners and complainers by the grace of God. Why do people moan and complain? We can say things like, they don't trust God. Well, that's a nice spiritual answer. But let's, kind of back off the spiritual answer a bit. Did you ever meet somebody who's in a really good place, moaning and complaining? Not usually. Usually moaners and complainers are in a rough place, a bad place, what I would call an unrest in their souls. It's a soul problem. However it got there, whoever said what, it's a soul problem. And underneath the complaining, come near, come on. I love your soul. And right now you don't. You're at odds. And you're struggling with a couple different things down deep inside you. Come on. What's the expense? 2 or 3 steps towards me. Making your way to me. Coming by without money, without anything. Just come. Come so I can give you what you need so that your soul can be in a better place than it currently is. Satisfied with the delights of his glory. Abundance versus lack. And we're not talking about things. We're just talking about this wonderful place in God when we know his peace. And it's like, I can't think of anything, quite frankly, to moan about at the moment. I mean, I have to move away from the peace of God, the joy of God, the love of God, the goodness of God, the glory of God, the kindness of God, compassion of God. I have to move away from that. I have to stop believing him to be great. I have to stop believing him to be glorious. I have to stop believing a lot of stuff before I can move towards that moaning place. And I do. I said, but it will only last for a moment. As soon as God and the Spirit of God and his grace kicks in, and I'm able to shift from that place of being a moaner and a complainer and getting angry, shift from that back to the place of, like we said, nevertheless, God, nevertheless. God is good and God is glorious. And his goodness is there for me to engage in. Why? Based on this situation? No, based on who he is. And I see it in the face of Jesus Christ. And I don't know why things are going the way they are. I care, but I know he cares more. And he knows more. So where am I going? Moaners and complainers, come on. Come closer. If you don't, you'll die out there in the wilderness. And that, we know the story. These people who refused to come near died out there. You'll die in your moaning and complaining. That's the way it works. Following the feeding, Jesus walks on water. And his big message there is trust me. Fear not, trust me. I am. And it says, it's really cool. I don't know if you ever read it like this, but as soon as they do, it says they immediately passed over the lake. While we're looking at feeding the thousands and the walking on water, that boat, he got in the boat, and the Greek word is that they immediately landed at shore. That's like faster than 100 miles an hour. You say, how immediate is immediately? That fast. That's immediately. So how did that happen? It's a spiritual lesson. That what happens when we finally decide in our souls that we are going to trust him, immediately we land in the place we're supposed to be all along. As we get to the next day, verses 22 through 59, that's when the I am the bread of life kicks in. John chapter 6, verse 26, and it's the following day. They see that Jesus is not where he's supposed to be, which is what we experience all the time, isn't it? He's not where he's supposed to be. We don't know where he went and how he got there, but he's certainly not here anymore. Let's go find him. Now that's a good thing. Seek the Lord. Excellent. So they go seeking the Lord. They catch up with him on the other side of the lake. They're confused about how he got there and all that kind of stuff. Verse 26.
Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the miracles, but because you did eat the loaves and were filled.
That's a really nice way of saying you're in it for the Egyptian bread. He's really nice. He's not like me. I would say you're a bunch of freeloaders, aren't you? You're looking at a meal ticket for the next week or 2 or month or whatever. You're going after the food that perishes. You're feeding your faces on things that are not giving you any kind of abundance of the soul. It's filling your tummies up, though. Remember, the reason why I call it Egyptian bread, remember back in Exodus 16, verse 3, when they said, oh, back in Egypt, we sat by the pots of meat and all that. We ate bread. They're not talking about manna. They're not even talking about matzah bread, because that wasn't given to them until later. They're talking about the Egyptian bread. They used to sit there. We had bread. We had as much bread as we could eat in Egypt. As the story continues in verses 30 through 35, they start to compare Jesus to Moses, that the day before he fed who he fed, but Moses, they're trying to psych Jesus out, but Moses fed the children of Israel for 40 years in the wilderness. So what are you going to do? That's kind of what they're presenting him with. They kind of think they've got him. So are you going to take care of us for 40 years? If not, you're not as good as Moses. See, it's all for them. It's totally about the natural, the physical, the worldly things. And we've got so many admonitions in the New Testament. You got to get off that stuff. It's just going to ruin you. I talk to a lot of all kinds of people, but a lot of times young people whose lives are a wreck already in their 20s because they've given themselves over to something that's not good for them. And trying to get away from that thing is like a nightmare. All they have to do is come. But the lure of those things. John 6, verses 32, 33.
Jesus then said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread out of heaven, but it's my Father who gives you the true bread out of heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down out of heaven and gives life to the world."
The true bread from heaven, the bread of God, gives life to the world. He'd say a little later that he's come that they might have life more abundantly. He's the bread of life. Not Egyptian bread, but the bread of life. So they would have a satiated, refreshed soul. I am the bread of life, more abundantly. Living bread that came down. More than manna, more than miracles. They ate and died eating manna. You're going to eat of me and live. I am the bread of life, the glory of God. I mean, it's just like stuffed with it. And it's kind of interesting. You would have thought I am the bread of life would have been up front when he fed the thousands. That's where I would have expected it to be. That he feeds the thousands and then says, as they're all eating and having a grand time, by the way, I am the bread of life. But it doesn't come there. It comes later on when he's got a bunch of people demonstrating a wilderness mentality. We need food. Don't worry about your food. Don't worry about it. Let's live on miracles. Hey, that's a great idea. So you can live on miracles and die. That's what they did in the wilderness. It's a wilderness mentality. Go to any kind of miracle convention where there's, and I'm not against miracles, don't get me wrong. I am against the mindset that thinks that you have to go someplace when Jesus is inside you right here and now, and whatever you need, he will provide. That you need to go to a miracle worker, by the way, which is a gift. I'm not against it. It's the mindset that has us running all over the place. They'll say, hey, Jesus is over here. Hey, he's over there. You got people running all over the place when he's right here, right now. And I'll never leave you nor forsake you. And that miracle mindset, that manna mindset, I want to see the miracles. Oh, I'd love to see miracles. Probably more than Jesus. It's a mindset that's a killer. You can get all the miracles you want and die. And that's not what Jesus is after at all. But he identifies himself as the bread of life in the context of this has gone a little bit too far now. Let's pull this thing around. And he's talking to Jews who know Exodus 16, and there's a very strong reference back there. They brought up the subject of Moses, so he's saying, okay, well, let's do Moses then. Let's do the manna thing. Think about it. This is that. That is this. See, the glory of God that I want to get to the bottom line today, the glory of God is this. It has to do with the unrest of our souls. The whole thing that we've read in Exodus 16, there's unrest in their souls. John 6, they get fed. They want, more of that particular thing. We all experience unrest in our souls. I think the first and best thing that we can say, because we're talking about the glory of God, is God is good. God is good. And I think we should probably say it enough until we believe it, instead of just saying it. Because when that really, really, really hits, God is good. His glory is all of his goodness. And that's what's available. God is good. I don't expect that that would necessarily mean an awful lot to somebody who doesn't know God. But for us, as his children, when we start to have that leanness of soul, falling into complaining or whatever, God is good. I mean, he really is. God's good. We're complaining. God is good. God is good. He calls us to trust and obey. Why? Because he's on a power trip? No, because that's where the life is. That is where the life is. He says gather, which is a way of saying do what you can. Do what we can, and he'll do what we can't. And trust him through that whole process. Do it. Obey. He calls us to come. Buy without money. Daily, though. Be content. Be grateful. See, in the wilderness, they needed food. There was no doubt about it. Natural. Also supernatural. They did need that. But we could have done without the complaining if they would have listened to him, if they would have trusted him, if they would have obeyed him. And that moment, Exodus 16, becomes a teachable moment. Just like John 6 is a teachable moment. These are teachable moments that scream at us, you can trust him. Do what he says and trust him. And know that he is full of goodness. He is good. And all of his goodness, he wants to pass before you. That's what he really wants to do. But he's not going to force himself on us. He's going to wait till we want him to. The negativity, the moaning, these are signs of a soul problem. A wrong value system, a lack of trust, unrest, due to not recognizing that God is good, that you can trust him, that he honors us while we're talking about the glory being the honor. He honors us with every good thing. He withholds nothing. He provides food that we might have an abundant soul, even though we created a situation of an earth that produces thorns and thistles.